Again, there's up to a lot of boards to implement that.
Isn't that the worst, most congested intersection?
I would say the Milestone Rotary is probably the busiest intersection. That the queues at the Four Corners intersection is pretty incredible, and it's it's more of a year-round problem than just a July and August problem. Especially being around the schools, there's more activity around the schools year-round in the fall and the spring. So obviously, that's a lot of congestion and queues at that intersection.
The elementary school pickup and drop off is an issue for a lot of people. It also creates further congestion along the Surfside Road. Are plans being worked on to improve that?
They have been worked on. That was part of the discussion of the new school design, is the pickup and drop off activity. That's where those will be located. How that was the number one problem. Everybody has that concern about how can I drop my child off and get out of that area safely and conveniently and cause as least amount of disruption as possible. That was definitely thought through. There's separate pickup drop-off areas that were in the designs for the elementary school. So there'll be there's other opportunities to exit the property, so that not everybody's funneled into a particular driveway or one particular road. So it's spread out, and you're not channelizing all of that traffic. So there would be relief, and that was thought about and
but what
was
about
incorporated
getting
into the
into
design.
the street and off of the street?
Correct. There'll be more opportunities for that. So there should be some relief experienced once the construction is complete, because that was definitely one of the areas that was thought through and incorporated into their design.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Easy Street. Let's talk about Easy Street. What's going on down there?
Well, this is an area about 500 feet from the steamship Broad Street and the steamship wharf, going down to right about Cambridge Street and the Still Dock area, and obviously the bulkhead area, which is a nice, that's going to be replaced, this yellow area here. That the bulkhead will be replaced, and what we'd like to do is improve sidewalks that are adjacent to that bulkhead improvement area. That right now is not very accessible for two-way pedestrian flow along Easy Street, especially at the end towards Broad Street. If you're dragging a suitcase from steamship and there's other folks dragging suitcases to the steamship, it's a 3-foot wide sidewalk. I mean, there's just somebody's going to be pushed into the street. What we'd like to do is widen that out using some of the properties that the land bank had recently acquired. There's going to be some parking that needs to be removed from Easy Street, so it can facilitate the widening of that. So it's
How many spaces? 8?
right about 8. Yeah. Perhaps there could be a few spaces preserved that wouldn't need to be removed by widening the sidewalk out onto the property. But there's most of the parking along Easy Street, especially in the sections abutting the bulkhead, those would need to be removed. And again, it's in the vein of improving pedestrian access, which I think would make everybody happier.
When's this on the books for?
Again, probably something this fall and winter and spring.
The whole project?
Yeah, it should be. For this particular section,
Is there anything being planned down on in the Straight Wharf area to deal with the Highline congestion?
Correct. That's one segment of what we're calling a Phase 1 sidewalk improvement. Again, this is one of the projects that town meeting approved this year, $1.5 million for sidewalk improvements in the downtown, for Phase 1 of the downtown sidewalk improvements. And that would increase pedestrian flow or make it more accessible from essentially the Children's Beach area, South Beach Street, down to the town parking lot. So that whole, which incorporates the Straight Wharf area, Straight Wharf, New Whale Street, Commercial Street, even a section of Candle Street. Though all those sidewalks there was funding approved to improve the sidewalks for that entire area. This is one component of that first phase. We're calling it Phase 1B to make everything even more confusing. But there was funding dedicated to this, and there's improvements that'll be anticipated, that the public should anticipate into the future.
What about the traffic flow down there? Is there anything that can be done about that?
What time of year?
Well, from May to October.
Yeah, obviously we have a lot of crosswalks, a lot of pedestrian activity, and balancing out the trying to get people onto the ferry connector bus, using that as an option instead of doing the kiss and drop at the boat ferry, the ferry terminal itself. Maybe we do that at a satellite location and people can take a bus in. Right now they have that opportunity with a ferry connector.
Does anybody use it for that?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. The two fairgrounds parking lots full. It's about 80 vehicles
Yeah,
parked
but
there.
those are mostly trucks. Those are mostly commercial. I'm talking about
mostly. Yeah.
yeah.
So there's a segment of it that people do use it. I mean, I've done that. Just because I know about the system, and
Right.
I honestly don't. There's no other way. You can't leave your vehicle by the high line of the steamship. You can't. So you have to take some kind of other form. Depend on somebody to drop you off, take a taxi, or take the bus. My preference is I'll just jump on the bus to go down there. It's it's not incredibly expensive, and it's another option. There are officers down at the Straight Wharf area that helps control traffic, stopping people from parking in the middle of the road to take their luggage out and bring it onto the boat. If somebody stops in the middle of the road, nothing's moving. So enforcing that.
But the other side of it too is the pedestrians sort of walking uninhibited everywhere. Traffic isn't moving either.
Yeah, so that does get controlled too. The service officers do their best. Obviously, it's a very complicated flow.
The same thing is true on Broad Street.
Correct. Yeah.
And if people stayed on the other side of Broad Street, it would make a big difference too.
Sure. But obviously the goal is to keep everything flowing slowly and safely, but keep it flowing. And then, if anybody has to stop in the middle of the road, obviously we want to keep that to a minimum because everybody needs to get through that area. But we want to keep it as a pedestrian-friendly environment. Slow-moving traffic is one way to do that. Having accessible crosswalks to delineate areas that are appropriate to cross and, not in the middle of the street.
But should there be some, restraint on pedestrians crossing at will? Because that's what happens now, and everything stops.
Yeah.
And there are other places where, Greenwich, Connecticut, for example, the police chief and I were discussing this last week. There they have traffic officers who regulate the flow of both cars and pedestrians.
Yeah.
And since we don't want to get into traffic lights, it's something that should, like that, be considered here.
Yeah, we don't want to get into traffic lights.
Right.
Obviously, we want to be a very courteous and friendly community too. So to have a hard, ticketing people that are walking across the street, I don't think that's obviously the worst case.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is somebody providing some guidance to people or asking them to wait a moment rather than.
Which I think happens with the community service officers doing that. That happens to some extent. Obviously, there's personnel.
I can't recall ever having seen that.
Okay. It happens down at the steamship area, and I'm sure there's areas on Broad Street where that can happen when there's personnel to allow that to happen. Obviously, it's being a courteous visitor as well. You shouldn't feel like it's your right to walk into the middle of the road and do your own business at the sacrifice of other people's convenience. Obviously, it's courtesy that you got to exercise.
That raises an interesting point, but I want to get to Old South Road in a minute. But just quickly, there are certain intersections, like the one by the Four Corners, the one coming up I think it's William Street, where people think as a matter of right, they can go up there and they can break in to the traffic, even though there's a stop sign.
Yeah.
And there's no stop sign on Sparks Avenue. They think as a matter of right they can break in. The same thing is true at Easy Street and Broad Street. People just assume that they're going to be let in.
Yeah, well, we have this, and that happens at Bartlett and Surfside Road as well. A lot of people just stop and stick their arm out the window and wave people through. There's a lot of courtesy that goes on here, and it's very unique to this community. And I would argue it's one of the quirks that make it a friendly, unique place. It gets
You
there
can
is a
also
point
argue
where
that people take it as a matter of right.
You can abuse any privilege, absolutely.
That they can do it, and people do here.
Oh, sure, they do.
A lot.
Yeah, it's just human nature. It's but there's a friendliness there that makes that nice. So you don't ever want to stop that, but it does when. If we address the Sparks
I
Avenue,
beg to disagree.
If the roundabout at the Four Corners was implemented and the queue along Sparks Avenue was a lot less and it wasn't so aggravating just to get through that intersection, I would think that it would be more acceptable to go and do exactly what you're talking about, allowing people to cut in. Right now, it's like, my gosh, this is the worst case scenario.
I've been in
and on
line
top
for
of the
20
worst
minutes,
case.
and this guy just comes up and gets in.
Yeah, obviously it's aggravation.
Why not make
Yeah.
William Street one way the other way?
Well, that's something that probably could be done as well. We've looked at that, and there's a balanced flow right now along William Street. Demand to go both ways. Sure, that could be an option.
Old South Road.
Okay.
What's going to happen there? Paston is building is seeking approval to build his development there. Over 200 units, dwelling units. What's going to happen?
He's made.
I've been told what they think is going to happen, but I'm
Yeah.
interested to hear from you what's going to.
Well, some of the proposals for Old South Road with the creating a landscape median and creating a turning lane to allow for a safer turn without creating too much congestion. Those are great tools to use. And to be honest with or without that, there's other potential in that area for.
But isn't the development catching up with the ability of the road to handle the traffic?
Sure, and that gets to a design for all modes. Should there be some kind of sidewalk bike path on the south side of Old South Road? Should there be bus pull-offs at each one of the very popular stops along that corridor? I mean, it's a very dense area, very heavily settled, a lot of transit access. Should we have bus pull-offs as part of that? Are there safe ways to make a left-hand turn onto Old South Road? You know, you have to, you know, in order to reduce crashes, make that safe for drivers, make it safe for pedestrians to cross the road. You know, all these things have to be weighed in. There started to be some discussion of that. There will be more of a corridor study done over this next winter to look at the entire corridor. I mentioned some intersection improvements. Obviously, the Milestone Rotary could be reconfigured to accept more capacity. There could be improvements at the Fairgrounds Old South Road intersection that I've already mentioned. And then there's the whole corridor itself along Old South Road for all the modes. That's going to be looked at this winter for doing that.
Where's that on the priority list?
It's right now it's the #1 study in our plans. That's something that we're going to be doing this winter, is looking at Old South Road for all modes. You may be aware of the town of Nantucket has approved a complete streets policy. Basically, it's saying that any type of roadway investment that's done in this community is going to consider all modes, all abilities, and all ages of users. So that's going to be incorporated into this corridor study of Old South Road.
That's the first one?
Yes. I don't know what you mean by the first study. We've had lots of studies.
First study in which this will be incorporated.
Formally, as a policy of the Board of Selectmen of the town of Nantucket, yes, but you might recall the Mid-Island Area Plan that was done 2003, I believe that was approved. That looked at, again, creating Pleasant Street, that area by the Stop and Shop, which now is starting to be implemented next to the Stop and Shop, making that more of a pedestrian, multimodal facility. Introduce traffic calming elements. That was done there without a formal policy. Everybody thought it was best practice. Now we have a formal policy.
What can we learn from mostly the Europeans on bicycle-friendly environments, other than bike paths, but just places to park, places to leave the, pick up and drop off, things like they have in New York with these,
City bikes.
Yeah. And so forth. What are we doing in that respect?
I think you nailed it. We're looking at bike parking opportunities. Remain Nantucket donated a lot of these bike bollards that are installed in downtown and on Main Street.
But they're right in the middle of the sidewalk.
They're not really in the middle of the sidewalk. It's right.
They're close enough to the middle of the sidewalk.
Yeah.
They do block pedestrian traffic too.
Yeah. And when it's not there, the old bike rack, the old ladder-looking grid contraptions,
did the same thing.
you couldn't walk through those. Right now, there's more flow between the parked vehicles through the bike racks to that area. I think the bikes are kind of in their own area, and there's just as much flow for pedestrians as there was before. I think it's a nice treatment. But the point is that there's more opportunities to park your bike, whereas before you were tying your bike up to a light pole and street sign and anything you could find that your lot could
But
accept.
there's no place at the Stop and Shop, for example, to do that, downtown or out in Mid-Island.
Well, they have the wooden racks there that have questionable conditions.
Right.
They're boards that are nailed together
Right.
instead of
Yeah.
some good metal with
It's
integrity.
not user-friendly.
Yeah, and I don't know if I feel comfortable tying up a $2,000 bicycle to a 2x4.
I wouldn't own a $2,000 bicycle, much less tie it up to a 2x4.
But we have a lot of bike shops right now that rent out to a number of different people. There's a lot of people own bikes here rather than seeing a need to rent them. I don't know what the market is for renting bicycles. I'm sure there's a lot of people who have thought about that, and if there was a buck to be made, there'd try to be made.
Well, except again, they have to have a place to do it from.
Yeah, the example for you said for New York City and their rentals, they have a financial setup to where you can only keep it for 30 minutes. I think we have more of a demand to use a bike greater than 30 minutes. It takes all day long to bike out to Wisconsin and back. So you should probably rent the bike for the entire day. Right now, the economics of it work to where it's easier to rent a bike or at least own one instead of renting it for 30 minutes and paying some penalty for going beyond that. So it's probably
obviously we have a balance to strike between user friendliness and the historic quality of the island and so forth. But
we should have paths. We should have sidewalks.
we do have paths. But again,
stenciled
in
roads
the
to let
municipal-
drivers know that
the municipal in the core area downtown, not the historic district, but the commercial area, I would think should really make it a priority to make it bicycle friendly.
Absolutely, and that's definitely the sentiment of the Board of Selectmen. That was something that we spent a lot of time this winter on, is talking about connections from the downtown area to the network of bike paths outside of the downtown area. So there's been some progress. We went and did a review of all the projects that have been done, the extension of the Cliff Road path, this in-town path we've worked on, the bike parking. There's a lot of that. Creating more bike routes, stenciling the roads instead of, we can't, some of these roads are very, very narrow.
Right.
And if you look at examples like, a lot of the European examples, they have a confined area. Sometimes you have to share the road, but make it as safe as possible to share the road. Not just make the assumption, but do some kind of delineation and wayfinding information for the bicyclists and drivers to communicate that this is a multimodal corridor that it needs to be shared. And that effort's already been exercised with the share roads that you see in some locations. And then the extension of bike paths and networks and widening of sidewalks into the downtown area. So it's a never-ending battle, but there's definitely a plan and strategy to get that done. And every year will be an improvement, I believe.
You have a lot on your platter, Mike Burns.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being with us and sharing it.
Pat, thank you for having me.